You just have to fail once and you could try something else, right? And, so like that's how I look at it, that it's worth taking a chance on something, then you don't have to do it again if it doesn't work.
Your network is your net worth. Come listen to some of the most successful people I know share invaluable knowledge, stories, and advice in real estate, business, and beyond. This is Weiss Advice. Whether you want to take your business or personal life to the next level, look no further. Welcome back to another episode of Weiss Advice. I am your host, as always, Yona Weiss. I am excited to be here today with Val Katayev from New York. How you doing?
Hey, Yona, how you doing? Thanks for having me on.
It's a pleasure. It's not often that we have someone on the show who is not, I wouldn't say solely focused on real estate, meaning what I mean by
I don't
that
know
is,
why you have me on the show. I have nothing to do with real estate.
I know, right? No, you are. Come on, you're developing properties in Brooklyn. No, but what I mean by that is you have such a diverse experience of having launched several companies in various industries. And what a lot of people who have that path, put money into real estate and kind of find that as a way to grow their wealth. But I'm curious to know, kind of how you got started. I'd love for our listeners to get a little background on who you are and what you do for those of us who don't know who you are.
All right, so I'll start with my background. Spent the last 25 years building mostly tech-related companies, mostly started out with a big search marketing, I want to say business in terms of profits. I was a one-man show. Then got a lot into music, tech-related, music distribution, ringtone, I was a big player in the ringtone space, and launched a mobile ad tech company that I still own to this day. It's a pretty big company that, has significant, has hundreds of Fortune 1000 companies as clients. Launched a tech-enabled jewelry company that helps independent jewelers, specifically in North Americas. And so that's been kind of my background. I've been pretty successful, sold a few of these companies, all self-funded, all bootstrapped. Never took any VC money from any of these companies. I did miss a fund management company that we actually put about 1.7 billion of credit through our funds that we manage. It's a company called Prime Meridian Capital Management out of San Francisco. So years ago, I realized that how did I get started in real estate? Years ago, I realized that I'm super under allocated in real estate. And I figured, okay, I'll start making some investments there. First one I did was an investment in the building that was being remodeled, or actually converted from an old storage building in Manhattan to residential. And sponsor had a pretty good track record of doing that before. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I get into a deal where the sponsor and his biggest investor get into a major fight. The building was 90% done. The two big boys get into a big fight. And I ended up being just innocent bystander. And at that point, I kind of realized that I'm not going to do any other minority deals in real estate. I felt like I wanted to own that. Mm-hmm. I have a friend whom I've known since high school, actually a family friend as well. He actually comes from a finance background. His family was in construction, and he left his finance job and went and joined his father in construction. And I courted him for about a year, say, hey, enough with this construction stuff. Why don't you do development? I'll back you up and I'll put the balance sheet on the line. And, look, I won't be able to help you with much more than that. Right. And I'll be your biggest supporter, and, let's start a business doing developments. And that's kind of how I got going on that front. And that's all I've done. I put all my real estate related investments are in my own properties through my development company now.
Gotcha. Okay. So just to kind of recap that, there's a lot of background there. And the amazing thing, like you said, dealing in multiple industries from mobile, music, search, data, jewelry, a lot of tech related companies, which is incredible that you were able to bootstrap them, grow them and sell some of them and make tremendous profits, obviously. And One thing that a lot of people who come from that do is, how do I invest that money? Right. And fortunate for you, you're able to have a partner or a friend who had experience in construction and development. And so you're able to kind of combine those forces of the funds and actually getting involved in the real estate development deals. And are you involved on a day-to-day basis in those deals? Or, obviously there are your own properties now, right? But are a lot of people get involved in real estate and then just become passionate about that? And this is all I want to spend my time focusing on. Or are you dealing with other projects simultaneously?
Today, most of my time is actually invested into the one company that I am the CEO of, which is Jocalio. That's the jewelry related company that I mentioned before. Yeah, so that's where most of my time goes. All my other companies have their own CEOs, and generally they're co-founders of mine, so they're partners, and they're amazing at what they do. And I try not to get in the weeds. The real estate part, I get updates pretty much every couple of days or daily. There's something really, right? But
Right.
no, I don't. I'm not in the day-to-day. I'm not day-to-day involved in those businesses or the real estate. I probably visit the site once every 6 months, if anything.
Right.
I let my partner run that show, and when I need to step in and help with anything, but that's generally something finance related, or where the bank is too slow to do pay out a requisition, from a construction loan. And, and I say, don't slow it down. Here's the money, keep going, so that's kind of, I just want to be there to support and generate the fastest and the highest return for ourselves. Sometimes we allow some investors into some of our projects, but yeah, I just want to be supportive to my partner.
That's awesome. Tell me a little more about this Jocalio that you are focused, like you said, still the CEO, still running this jewelry business, kind of reinventing how businesses are run. There are, I don't know, you tell me how many thousands of jewelers out there in North America. What are you doing differently or helping them to do? Because that seems like something that I've never heard about before. So I'm fascinated by it.
Yeah, absolutely. So jewelry is a pretty big business. In the US alone, it's about $80 billion. Globally, it's about $300 billion. What's interesting in the US, something like two-thirds of the sales are actually happening at independent jewelers. There used to be about 20,000 independent jewelers in this country. They're shrinking. It's probably down to 12,000 or so now. And it's because it's not sexy. It's not, it's tougher. The majors are getting, majors meaning like the chains, right? They're, especially the one big chain that's just getting bigger and bigger. So what I'm building is a company bringing all my background, my data and marketing and all the services, all the tech stuff. I bring all that into play. And if I look at kind of who we go up against, as what I saw in the market, there is an $8 billion juggernaut that does jewelry. And it's a public company called Signet. They own all the biggest jewelry names. You've never heard of Signet, but you've heard of all the names. So Case Jewelers, Zales, Jared, Diamonds Direct just acquired. They acquired Blue Nile. They acquired James Allen, Piercing Pagoda. All those brands are one company, Signet. They have almost 3,000 locations. And so what I'm building is essentially if we look at Signet, they have 3,000 buildings with salespeople in them. And they have a headquarters that makes all the decisions, the marketing, the services, the product development, right? And producing all the jewelry or working with the vendors to produce the jewelry. So I'm building a business that is basically the headquarters for independent jewelers.
Yeah, interesting.
Oh, yeah, okay. So essentially bringing
everyone together like one platform.
Exactly. And that just kind of elevates them and gives them the backbone or the platform to do things independent jewelers couldn't do before. With Jocalio, they're able to, we help them execute on a lot of these things and be a lot more competitive.
Yeah, and efficient, obviously, because it's very difficult when you're competing with some of these larger companies. It's essentially what you're doing. You're just kind of leveling the playing field.
Yeah, exactly. That's our pure focus is independent jewelers, nothing else. We're here to empower them. Unfortunately, we can only do it one per territory. So, our goal is to have a store in every town where if there's a Walmart, we want to have a jewelry store on that's part of our, what we call Jocalio Collective. So I want to have a store that's part of the collective in every town that has a Walmart. So that's the goal. And my vision is that it's going to be the collective versus all the Signet locations out there in the coming years.
Yeah, until they buy you out, right? Or something like that.
Yeah,
or vice versa, right?
Well, that's not the goal, but I don't have the background of building just to sell. Many of my companies, some of them I did sell, but yeah, I own a number of companies still, and I'm building something for the long term. And yeah, it's not, necessarily just to exit.
So one thing, we met at a dinner a few months ago, and one thing that I heard you talk about there very briefly, and it was, again, probably part of a larger discussion, and maybe pulling it out of context, but maybe you can give a little more context to it. I mean, you've gone through a lot. You're saying you're doing this for 25 years, right? You're building companies and bootstrapping along the way. You've been through downturns. How is someone like who is starting a company right now, or someone who is, in the process or has started a company in the last, 6 to 12 months or so, trying to get through the current downturn that we're in? I mean, what do you think is some advice that you would give? I mean, you gave some earlier, but if you can kind of hone in that.
Yeah. I've done this for 25 years because I've started this in high school. So I'm not, so, I had a chance to experience kind of the dot-com bubble in the early, young age. And
Mm-hmm.
then obviously 2008, I was still fairly young. And obviously with COVID and everything, I would say it was just the bliss of being oblivious to, what's going on outside, and just being able to focus on what I'm working on, right? It's almost like it didn't matter, you know, did it affect it something, especially, like if I think about the dot-com bubble, I went, at a website at the time making $5,000 a month. All of a sudden I went to $300 a month because kind of the ad revenue just dried up. But, I was oblivious to that because I just figured out how to sell to somebody else directly.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that actually helped me progress. I think that too many people get too caught up in the headlines,
Mm-hmm.
caught up in the emotions of what's going on out there, whether it's political or economical. Again, maybe I was blessed that I have a bit of a more balanced approach to things, and I tend to just kind of have these blinders on. And that kind of helps me to get through a lot of these, to see less of what's going on out there. And that kind of distracts me. Again, as a result, have a lot less distractions. And I get it. Like some people are just different, that they are much more emotional or absorb, or take things to heart at all, whether it's directly at them or just something that's going on in the world than others. But if I had to share what helped me, I think that's what it was. So if you could apply that and think about distractions differently, I would say that's the big thing.
100%. It's so true. You see the successful people who ride through the waves are not paying attention to the news. They're not paying attention to the naysayers. They're just solely focused. And I think that's a great point when you can focus and kind of hunker down on what you are doing and don't be distracted by the things that aren't working. Just pivot and find something new to work.
Yeah, I mean, listen, you just have to fail once and you could try something else, right? And so like that's how I look at it, that it's worth taking a chance on something, then you don't have to do it again if it doesn't work.
Right. So on that note, I mean, you've built several successful companies. What are some of the ones that you failed at? Because obviously there have been some things that you've tried to build or had ideas and just, they failed miserably.
Yeah, before I started Jocalio, actually, I kind of stopped tinkering around with trying to create a marketplace for a more integrated marketplace for financial products. So kind of like if you think about Lending Tree, but the time Lending Tree, I'm not even sure, maybe that's still the case. You need a personal loan or something, and you put in your information and they sell your information to somebody, and you start getting contacted by all these brokers, and basically it's a lead, right? It's like a lead platform. What I wanted to do is actually integrate all of these lenders and financial products through APIs so that rather than selling off leads, I wanted to give the consumers access to an approval on the spot. So, and I launched this around 2017 or so. And, I was actually writing a thread about this, and I think it's still in draft somewhere. But after 6 months, I decided to call it a day, and because I realized this business would always be very volatile because of the credit.
Right.
Whatever the credit is in the market. I think 2018 or 2017, the banks kind of start tightening up their credits, and all of a sudden, I start seeing a lot of my integrations saying, "Hey, we don't want any like customers right now." So all of a sudden, the demand for the supply I was putting in wasn't there. But
Right.
so it's like, man, do I really want to run a business where it's always going to be this kind of yo-yo, and I'm going to be always at the mercy of the markets or the mercy of so. I think there's still a business. And I think actually, if you look at some of the businesses that were built around that, after that, they were very successful. But I just didn't want to run a business that was so cyclical, depending on credit cycles.
Interesting, because it is, anytime you are kind of dependent on outside factors, it makes it very difficult to scale a business
Yeah.
because you're always going to be, dealing with those cycles of, whether it's working or not. That's pretty cool. So that's interesting.
So it was early enough that I said, I'd rather take the loss now and move on
Right.
Instead of putting in more time and money into it.
Yeah. I mean, did you ever have any like bigger losses in terms of startup failures, or have you been pretty, thankfully successful?
Probably the biggest one. I mean, I probably lost about $500,000 on that one. I mean, but no, I can't think of anything there. I had anything bigger. I mean, I mentioned the real estate deal before.
Right.
But no, not start. I can't think of a startup that kind of failed, after, a further development of it, right? Like this lending thing was just really an MVP. We launched and it was a live product, but it took me about $500,000 in 6 months from start to end.
That's amazing. Now you're also, like you said earlier, developing properties with your partner in New York City. Are you involved at all in like the site selection? I know you are in New York, so you know the area. You've been there for a long time. Is it something that you are looking at, hey, I'd love to build in this place or that location or something like that? Or do you have kind of goals or dreams to build something in a specific location?
No, look, I mean, we're trying to keep it boring, actually. I'm not trying to get into ego project. I think a lot of failures happen when that's what happens. Somebody gets into an ego project and then something doesn't go right and it's just too big for your portfolio of a failure. And then, it kind of drags everything down, right? So we're taking it a little more gradual where we have about $100 million worth of product that's, across 6 buildings. We completed 3 of them. We're about to complete our 4th and 5th over the summer. Actually, no, I'm sorry. We just got a condo book on our 4th, and in 2 months we should get another one in 2 months. So I'm just gradually getting these projects bigger and bigger. But I love some of these areas where we're focused. 5 out of these 6 projects are in kind of the northern Brooklyn areas, so Greenpoint, Williamsburg, and Carroll Gardens, and all those kind of areas. We're in fact not in Williamsburg right now. I would love to be in Williamsburg because that's like the cream of the crop in terms of the Brooklyn markets.
Sure.
And I'd love to, just every time the deals, we unfortunately didn't have a chance to close on the deal. And look, land is super tough to get now. I mean, you'd be thinking, right, with all the interest rates being high and construction loans are high, the costs are high. Like you would think that there'll be more supply of land. It's actually the opposite. It's super tough to acquire land for development right now, which is probably our biggest challenge of all challenges. Again, you would think it would be the interest rates and the construction costs, but no, it's just sourcing the property in the first place.
It's very difficult to buy land in New York in general, right?
Yeah.
But as years go by, it becomes increasingly more difficult. So I don't think it has to do with the interest rates and things like that, just the demand for prime location. I mean, like you said, they're not making any more land, and certain areas are very difficult to develop in. So that might be, part of it as well. If anyone knows about that, the Bob Knackle, who we're going to be interviewing next week, is going to talk more about that. But we'll keep you posted on more land sales and development sales in New York City. That's pretty exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll take a note on that.
Yeah. A question that has come up a lot recently, and you are someone who has been in the tech industry for a while, is the advancement of, artificial intelligence, AI, right? All this stuff. Are you using that and integrating that into your current businesses? And in what way, just if you are, because I'm curious, maybe some of us can learn from someone like you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I could tell you not so much in real estate for us yet, at least.
Right.
But I think that's going to disrupt that or help for sure. But when I look at the jewelry company, with all the marketing that we do, we have a full clienteling team as well that does clienteling on behalf of our stores. We are working on placing AI into a number of different areas and different facets of the business. So everything from marketing and marketing planning, the creative copy, communication at scale with clients and getting better at the quality of communication, inventory management, because we actually do manufacture jewelry in this company. That's part of our business, is not just the services and marketing, but we are actually the vendor in these stores as well.
Oh, interesting.
So that's the big thing. Like you actually can't hire us for the services without making us your top vendor.
Oh, wow. That makes so much more sense now that you're bringing that into the equation.
Yeah, this is not a business where marketing is a huge budget, but inventory is. And so the only way I could see a significant business that could be built, but also there are a lot of agencies that do stuff, but they can't do a lot of things because the product is not available. So there are a number of different facets that have to work together to provide that level of service, right? It's not just doing, let me just do your search advertising, or let me just do your social media advertising. No, there's so many facets involved, and that include marketing and data, but that includes also the product mix. And, we're adding AI where we can slowly to, connect all those dots on the product side, on the marketing side, but, like I said, clienteling side, but also how do you ingest the data as well? Because we're sitting on so much data across all of our, we absorb so much data from our jewelers, but also from the outside to help those jewelers. So how do you ingest and make sense of all that data and actually put it to work? So that's where our focus is on how to utilize AI.
Fascinating. I mean, there's so many uses for it at this point, but it's always interesting to hear business owners how they're implementing it in their own way. Because marketing and marketing copy is, obviously that's something that's very generic. Any business and everyone, no matter if you're running your own, your own startup or real estate, whatever it is, or you're a broker, you can use, ChatGPT to create copy and to come with marketing ideas and et cetera. But when you're honing down into the actual, nuts and bolts of running a company and, and dealing with specific vendors or specific partners, that to me that's like a game changer. That's very specific.
Yeah, it just allows us to scale where, in a very fragmented space, because it's tough to, it's very expensive and it's very resource intensive to handle such a fragmented industry that we are handling. And so if, AI could structure it, quicker for us and organize it quicker for us, that's where we're going to win in a big way.
Amazing. Any other projects that you're working on, but like new ideas that come up from time to time that you come up with and you're like, hey, this is something new I want to build, or are you kind of focusing on the current thing?
I am trying hard not to think about new ideas. That's how I get in trouble. I think of something and I was like, oh man, I got to execute this. And then the next thing I know, I'm like spending too much time in it or getting distracted. So it's been, that's the reason I have all these companies in the first place that I've started and built over the years, but there's only so much I could handle. And I try to also spend time with the family. So no, I do see a lot of things out there, but I definitely try to stay away from, getting too involved on the next shiny thing for me.
That's good. That's good to hear. Okay. Well, listen, it's always exciting to hear when someone has so many ideas. I have a very good friend who's been successful in, starting multiple businesses. And like every time I talk to him, he has a new idea. Like literally, I've coffee with him like every, 4 or 5 months or so. And it's just like a new idea, a new project, a new company, something. So it's always fascinating to meet people like that.
Yeah, look, I always try to focus on, making things successful, right? Because you get distracted too many times and kind of lose ability to be successful,
right?
Or get the big success in something. So if I could concentrate my energy and my resources into fewer things, I think it just works out better. I mean, a lot of ideas that come to me today, I execute them within Jocalio, for again, just using that as an example.
Sure.
We just came back from a huge trade show. We announced 4 different products and services. That was by far the biggest simultaneous launch for us in this business. And it's now time to execute all this stuff. So there are plenty of ideas. I'm just trying to concentrate all those ideas into one area so that all my team and our clients and our collective could benefit from that.
Wow. Yeah, that's true. And, I definitely hear the idea of, focus, and really if you're able to spend time in just one thing and focus on that and building one thing over time, you actually usually become more successful than trying to do too many things at once.
Yeah,
absolutely. Well, Val, time flies over here, but I want to transition now. We call the final 4. These are 4 questions I ask all my guests. First question is, what's the worst job you ever had?
It's funny. I probably have a couple. One is a quick one to explain. So I'll say I was the guy, like the digital monitor at the library back in I think 1999 or 2000 or something, when the computers just started, internet was just being placed in libraries. And I was the guy who's like watching, make sure people are not doing, using the computers for things they shouldn't be using them for. So it was an interesting job for a 17-year-old. But funny enough, I actually, when I came to this country at 11, I worked at a jewelry store every weekend in the summers. And towards the end of my high school, I think I was around 17 years old or so, I was asked to work on 47th Street in Diamonds District. My uncle actually owned a factory there, and a jewelry factory. He's like, hey, can you come? I have like a skeleton crew right now. I need just somebody to help me out. And at the time I already worked on a bench, meaning I could fix jewelry. Like I was this 15-year-old kid with a blowtorch, and, I could size rings and melt down gold, and I burned a couple of emeralds. And, so he's like, hey, can you help me out? And so I worked on 47th Street in a factory up in a building. And it was like, I was like, all right, I'm doing this for 3 weeks and I'm out. Like, I'm never doing jewelry ever again. So like, I literally, at that point, I remember coming home. My mom still reminds me of this. It's like, you came home and you said that you're never going to be in the jewelry industry ever, right? You're not going to do any work in the jewelry industry ever. I made this vow. And she reminds me about it now because I started a jewelry related company.
Yeah.
So that's probably my worst, job. Although even then, I love kind of like learning, and it's just sitting in a little factory, with nonstop noise and all that. I would probably think that was pretty bad.
It's amazing, how many experiences people can have. And, you talk about in New York City, there's so much going on in one tiny little strip of land, a little factory, jewelry factory. I mean, who would have thought? But that's pretty amazing that you had that background as a kid and then, coming back here years later, getting into the business.
Yeah, definitely kind of helped too, right? Right, having that little bit of understanding what happens on the vendor side or what happens with the, how jewelry is made. Also, what happens in the retail, right? Because I sold jewelry in a
Sure.
jewelry store as well. I was literally like 13-year-old kid selling engagement rings, and and it was kind of, now I think about it, it was pretty hilarious.
That is pretty funny. Second question I have for you is what's a book you've read that's given you a paradigm shift?
I'd probably say, it's a pretty big book, and so it's nothing too unique, but Outliers, right, by Malcolm Gladwell. It was interesting to see how just being, we talk about execution and we talk about, I do still think that execution is, a big part of things, but also luck does play a role, and just being at the right time and right place
Mm-hmm.
could allow you execution to happen as well. So just that book and the way that was laid out, how certain people were born in certain years and just, or if you're even born a certain time of the year, it just changes things, whether it's for business or professional sports careers or whatever. So it was fascinating to kind of see how these little details, how in life could have such a big impact in, your future.
Yeah, that is fascinating. I've actually never read that book. So it's on the list because it has been mentioned before on the podcast. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I get almost a new book every week to add to the list. So it's
It's a
slowly,
good book.
slowly,
Yeah.
slowly getting catching up to it. But whenever I get a repeat, it gets bumped up on the list. So it's good. Good to hear. I'll have to check that one out. And we'll put it in the show notes for anyone else who wants to check that out. Outliers. What's a skill or talent that you would like to learn? And this can be anything.
I think I could be, I get better, I think, at this, since getting on Twitter and, pretty much starting from scratch and, getting a pretty good follower base in the first year. I think that kind of elevated my communication skills and kind of understanding how people react to things at scale. And, I've historically, I've done marketing and, had access to, I was putting ads in front of billions of people. And, in my music company, in fact, it was in front of 500 million people every month. We had a distribution network of
Wow.
500 million people a month that were seeing our music related content, ringtones, whatever. And I was always very good at kind of funneling traffic, but I've never built a brand. So I think brand is about storytelling.
Mhm.
And I think that is still my weakness is storytelling in terms of how, that helps you build whether it's a personal brand or a product brand, right? So that's somewhere I think I'm still weak. And again, I get to learn a bit how people react and just being on social media and being on Twitter and having over 100,000 followers on it.
Sure.
But you kind of changes the mentality, what people react to and what people don't react to, or what people engage with or they don't engage with. So, but I think that kind of connects into the storytelling. And there's some people who are just born with this like gift of being able to tell a story that's, in a certain interesting way. And I was not born with that. I could guarantee you that. And, that's something that I'm learning to do.
Yeah, well, it's definitely a skill that can be learned. That's for sure. You're absolutely right. There are certain talents people are born with, but that's one that I think can definitely be learned, especially when it comes to marketing. And I don't know if you come across the book Story Brand, Donald Miller. It's an incredible work. And really, he breaks down a framework essentially of how to build a story, like how to build a brand. And, that's why it's Story Brand. And it's really interrelated. Highly recommend it if anyone hasn't checked that out.
Yeah, I'll check it out. Thank you.
Yeah. And fourth and final question is what does success mean to you?
Look, I mean, it's going to sound cliche, but, have the resources to, for freedom to do whatever you want, whenever you want, and not be bound by certain boundaries, right? That are, whether it's financially related, and usually when, you have the financial resources. But look, sometimes that also means that, you could have all the finances in the world, but you could be bounded by poor health, right? And you won't have the freedom then to do things that you want to do. You can have all the money in the world. So I think success is to have all the right things in place where you have the freedom to explore, entrepreneurially or, your time with the family or just kind of mentally. I mean, to me, that's success. But look, I'm not going to lie. It all starts with the dollars and, and then it's hard to have that freedom, at least for me, if you're not successful financially. And so I think it's a package, to be
Sure.
frank.
Yeah. I mean, there's always going to be more than that as well. Meaning even someone who is, I mean, take yourself, for example, right? You've built $100 million, companies where you're, certainly not lacking in the financial realm, but there's something else driving you that keeps you going and keeps you, pushing to build something else or to do something else.
Yeah, I mean, look, I had the freedom to retire. I did retire after selling a couple of my companies back in 2012, 2013. And, I retired. It lasted 3 years. I found that I have to build something that's just in me. And again, I had the freedom to retire and then the freedom to decide that, hey, I want to build. So let's build something, right? And so I was kind of blessed financially to be able to build something and invest significant amount of capital, because it is a very capital intensive business, the jewelry company, and it takes a lot of resources to build that, but without having outside capital.
Sure.
And same to be said for the real estate business. I mean, I'm financing most of the capital. In fact, the first two buildings we built were 100% my capital, and we even have a bank in the first deal. So I had the freedom to explore those things without being slowed down by banks or investors or anything like that. So I think it comes back to, hey, you got to build that foundation first so you could have even more freedom to do things you really want to do on your own pace.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating to me. I also have a good friend who built a couple companies, sold a company. It was a solar company that he built. This is probably like 15 years ago or so, and retired, who's had a kid, young kid. And he was just like, yeah, taking time off. And the next time I talked to him a couple years later, he was like, yeah, I'm, flying to Madrid next week to speak to some investors about a new deal. What? I thought you retired. He's like, I can't stop, you got to be building something. And so it's fascinating. It is ingrained in people who have that desire. So it's amazing to see. Val, it's really been a pleasure, a lot of fun talking to you and getting to know more about you and your business. How can our listeners find you or reach out to you if they want to?
Most of what I write is on Twitter, but I did put out a bunch of content actually on my Instagram and TikTok. So you could find me on there as well if you want to, someone watch some of the videos and such.
Okay. We'll make sure to put all your contact and socials in the show notes. It's, like I said, been a pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time out today.
Yona, appreciate it. Thank you very much. It was great talking to you.
And to our listeners, thank you all for listening all the way to the end. Once again, remember, the best advice comes only when you ask. Real quick, I have one question for you. Did you like this episode? If you did, I want to ask you a huge favor. See, the biggest thing that helps this podcast grow and that will spread this message to the whole world is that if you leave a review, a rating, and subscribe to the podcast. What that does is it basically tells the platforms that this podcast is out on is that you like my stuff and I'm doing something right. So take a few seconds out of your day, hit that subscribe button, leave a rating or review. I would be extremely grateful. Also, I want to hear from you guys. So I want to hear some feedback. If you have any questions for future episodes, please find me on LinkedIn. Send me a DM, a connection request, Yona Weiss, and I'd love to hear from you.